that allowed me to stick with the training that I had been doing, but also to expand and also manage people for the first time. So instead of managing teams, I was able to have direct reports and learn about performance appraisals and issues and whiners and moaners and all the things that happen when you manage people. And I actually loved it. So again, good to love what you do. Being in training, you probably know this from your professors, they clearly know their subject matter or they're not a great professor probably. So I felt that I always had to learn as much as I could before I could stand in front of people and train. So for me, it just continued in this second role in the training area, and I enjoyed that very much. One thing about working globally is you have different languages, you have different cultures, and sometimes even different words that are used for the same meaning. So I learned to put myself in other people's shoes and to really try to figure out, okay, what are they hearing? I'm probably not doing it very well tonight, and I apologize if English is a second language for anyone in here. But I learned to speak slowly, articulate clearly, so that people could understand me. And it worked very well. I would have feedback from people saying, wow, I understand you better than the Brits. And these would be Europeans saying things like that. But if you think about the British accent, when I actually will get to it, but I lived there for a number of years. And if the very proper British, it's almost like they say, put a plum in your mouth and then speak. So it's difficult to understand. And the people would say, you know, it's easier to understand the American accent. So speaking slowly, thinking about the people in the audience and what they're hearing. And then, again, what did I want to do next? Well, I wanted the European marketing job. And it probably sounds like I always got what I wanted, but I mean, I really worked hard to prepare. So in letting people know what my desires were, I also asked, how can I be number one on your list when that position opens? So I spoke to, well, first, the president of our division came. Oh, I'm skipping a job. How could I forget this? First, I wanted to go and be a sales manager because I had sold successfully. I had trained salespeople. Then I wanted to manage sales. So let me go there first. I moved to Atlanta, and Bruce quit his job and got a job down there. In fact, he got a job and started before I even got there. And we moved to Atlanta, which was a lovely place, pre-Olympics. I'm sure it's still lovely, too, but it was great because Kodak was a sponsor of the Olympics. They were coming to Atlanta. Yes, I was going to be able to go to events. It was going to be so cool. So I followed somebody who was a micromanager, and that really meant that people felt like they couldn't do their own thing. Everything was really managed by this guy who made all the decisions and really formed the way they did things, and didn't give them much independence. He also was a very creative type, which is really cool, except that today he'd have this idea and they'd be off doing this, and then the next day, and they hadn't finished this, he'd be like, we need to do this. And so they'd be like, oh, okay, and they'd come over here, and then it was do this. And so they were like, we really feel disrupted all the time. It's just not a good, healthy environment for sales. We want to do our job and we can't. So I listened to what made them crazy and tried to work through how could we alleviate that. Now my style is not, I'm not creative, so I didn't have them off in all different areas, and I'm a very trusting manager. I trust that you're hired for a reason, so do your thing, and I'll support you. And if you need my help, come and see me. And if I can help in any other way, let me know. And so it worked really well. Soon we had happy employees, and then we had happy customers, and our district grew the fastest of the districts that particular year. So it was a great job, but that's when I wanted to go to Europe. So the president came to see how sales were doing in Atlanta, and I had a career discussion with him, and he said, you want to be the European marketing director? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you're not marketing, you're sales. Well, happy that he thinks of me as a salesperson, but my degree was marketing. So I was like, well, I can be marketing too. So my next step was to talk to the hiring manager, the regional manager in Europe. And I had known him because when I was in the training job, I went to Australia for 2 weeks and trained his team. And he was very happy with the results of that. So I called him up because he was now in Europe. And I said, so that European marketing director job, when it's open, I'd like to be the best prepared person for that. And he said, yeah, you and 20 other people. But yeah, here's what I think you should do. And he gave me ideas of a few things to do and just said, you know, really keep showing your success in Atlanta because that's important for the other managers to see that. So I continued working hard in Atlanta. The guy in Europe was promoted, and I was asked to go to Europe. Now, of course, I'd already talked to Bruce about that, and my girls were too young then. They were 4 and 8, so I didn't have to ask them. But we got on a big airplane, which they thought was cool, and flew to London to live there for 2 to 3 years, which ended up being over 4 years. So it was really a great time in our lives. The pictures here are just depicting some of the cool places we went. We tried to vacation in Europe when we could. So kind of showing you, you know, you need to balance your family life with your work life. And a chance to vacation in Greece, a chance to see the Eiffel Tower, those were things that weren't going to happen if we were living in the U.S. So we did that as much as we could. We didn't fly home for Christmas. And some of our family was not so happy about that, especially when it ended up being 4 years. But sometimes you have to challenge your family too. And we challenge, and I have a big family, come and visit us. Get a passport. So anyway, some of our family did come and visit over the years, some didn't. And I think looking back, some of them now regret that they didn't take advantage of the free lodging they could have had while they were there, and people who knew how to drive on the loft. So it's always good to do what's right for your core family, so you need to think about that. Find your church family. Now, moving to London, we lived in a suburb of London, but the Brits just really weren't all that religious. The Catholics living in England were more faithful and went to church, but the Church of England, it just didn't seem to grab a lot of attention when we lived there. And so we didn't really find a church in the little town we lived in, but we were soon caught up in the American community there of expats and heard about an American church, I don't know, I guess we could just call it the American church. We met in a high school auditorium, and it was a mishmash of all kinds of Protestant and Catholic people who wanted to serve the Lord, and we were very diverse. I think our minister was Presbyterian, but so we had to say debts instead of, I grew up with trespasses, but you know, there were things like that. But it was a wonderful way to have a supportive community when you're far away from home. And I didn't mention earlier, but we certainly had church families in the U.S. everywhere we went, and it was important to our family, just like praying before our meal. So to find one in another country was very key to our success there. Oh, and I have this camel here because I just want to lighten it up in case you're falling asleep. But I haven't seen anybody falling asleep yet. But so I was on a business trip, and my boss, the Australian who was managing Europe, we went to call on a motion picture film laboratory in Egypt. And you know, we're driving up to it, and it's like, whoa, there's the pyramids and the Sphinx. This is pretty cool. And after the call, the Egyptian country manager said, "Do you want to go?" I was like, yeah. So we went, and he said, "Don't talk to the camel guys." Well, whatever he called them. They probably have a real name, but I can't remember. So we weren't going to talk to the camel guys, but we were going to get up close and personal with the Sphinx and the pyramids. Next thing I know, there's my boss talking to a camel guy, and there the camel guy, one of them, there were two, came over to me, and this camel kneels down, and their knees bend really weird, so they go down like this, you know, and so I had a skirt on, And I had to get on this camel, and you really want to ride it like, you know, a horse, you know, like my boss could with his trousers, you know, like, but I couldn't because I had a skirt on. So I'm side saddle, and I'm like this, and then the camel puts its front legs up, and so it was like very tense to not fall off this camel. And then you're like so high, and then they walk like this. So I'm sideways, hanging on for dear life on this little, it's sort of like a horse saddle, you know, you have that little thing you hold, and hoping I don't fall off. And I had contact lenses at the time, and the sand was blowing in my eyes. I'm like crying, but only because of the sand. I was actually having a okay experience with a camel. You know, it's something I could talk about today. So anyway, that was the story of the camel. So, you know, you have to be kind of prepared for stuff that you could never expect. So how do you prepare for it? You just have an open mind. So then, all good things must come to an end, and they needed to send me home. Bummer. And they kind of made up a job called